Welcome to Welcome, everyone. I'm Jordan. I'll introduce myself more in just a moment, but we're so excited to see you all here. This is our largest training group ever, the most interest we've ever had in our program, unprecedented amount of interest. And in fact, we had more interest than we had spots available. So you all are sort of the lucky ones who made the cut this time around. And I think this already highlights something quite beautiful about compassion in these times. There's kind of a teaching in this, isn't there, that all of these people had this strong interest in signing up for a program like this and in learning to grow their compassion and their care and their kindness for themselves and others. So I thought we could just take a moment even, I'm not sure what your Zoom screen looks like, but just to kind of look around this virtual space. Maybe you need to click around this virtual space to actually see the faces, but just taking a moment to really appreciate and take in that all these people, it should be somewhere around 75 in the end, have gathered here to grow our sense of care and connection and compassion in these times. So let's just do that for a moment. It may feel a little awkward, fair warning, to look around this virtual space like this, but I think it's a worthy exercise. It's truly extraordinary. And I also just want to express my own gratitude. And I'm sure Carla and Erica, when they speak in a few moments, will also express something similar for you all being here and for your interest in growing your compassion. So despite our large group, we are still going to make space, and there will be activities where you all will get the chance to meet at least some of the other people in this group, and we'll also have time for larger group discussion. And this has intention behind it. It's not just, to sort of get to know each other, but there's actually something in this that has to do with training compassion. So increasingly, there's more and more exciting research coming out about the benefits of talking to strangers, meeting other people, even in what's called minimal social interactions. So just even very brief social interactions, such as what you might have in a breakout group as part of this course. So connecting with each other in small groups and perhaps as a larger group is going to be a key component of this course. So again, my name's Jordan. My last name is pronounced Qualia. In case you were curious, you don't ever need to call me that. You can call me Jordan. And I'm an associate professor of psychology here at Naropa University. And I've been part of the teaching team for this Welcome program for a good number of years now. Gosh, I can't remember how many times we've taught this program now. But like I said, this is the most interest we've ever had in the program. So it's really exciting for us. I also serve as research director in our Center for the Advancement of Contemplative Education. And some of you are participating in this program as part of a study that's going on for that center and for my cognitive and affective science laboratories. So a few times I might bring up that study as part of this, but so you know, not everyone that's participating is participating because of the study. Others are here for different reasons. So I'm really excited about this program. I'm always excited to teach this program, in part because for a long time, mindfulness training was the exciting thing that was happening in society. There was this kind of mainstreaming of interest in mindfulness. And I've done research on mindfulness myself. I participated in mindfulness programs. I have a lot of good things to say about mindfulness. I think it's great. But interestingly, there's been this shift in the field of people who study these kinds of things and train in these kinds of things, kind of a little bit away from mindfulness, or maybe that's not the right way of saying it, but toward compassion. And there's this idea that compassion may be unique in its benefits, and there might be a kind of 2-for-1 benefit, I've heard it called, with training in compassion, that we get many of the benefits that we might get from training in mindfulness, but then we get these additional components as part of training compassion as well. And it's exciting for me too, because it seems like there's new research, new science, as a scientist myself, who studies this stuff coming out each week or each month. That's really exciting to share. And so it'll be part of my role in this course to share some of that sort of cutting edge work with you and to try and find some of the best stuff. But you're always welcome to also reach out to me if you find something in the scientific literature or you see something published online that you're interested, and maybe we can bring it in for the bigger group as well. And so I also wanted to say that you all are sort of still, in my view, kind of early on in the mainstreaming, I hope, the mainstreaming of compassion. I think you've probably encountered the mindfulness mainstream movement at this point. It's sort of gotten large enough that most people have heard of mindfulness and maybe even practiced a little bit in some way. But we're still quite early in this, what I hope becomes a similar kind of movement around compassion. And you all are part of that. You're one of the earlier groups that's training in compassion in this kind of way. So you could say that you're sort of at the cutting edge, right? We're at the cutting edge here together. So again, thank you all for being here. I will pass it off to my colleague Erica at this time to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. It's exciting, as Jordan said, to be here. And gee, what can I say? My name is Erica Berland, and I've had a long association with Naropa, going back many years to its roots, actually. And for the last, I think, Jordan, it was 2017 when we began the crafting of the Welcome program, and I was in on that beginning process. My role at Naropa for over 15 years and more recently was in helping with my partner create an MFA in contemporary performance, where we worked with a lot of art practices in terms of performance, but related also to meditation and, of course, compassion as well was part of that program. I'm a what's called a body-mind centering practitioner, so a lot of my work involves somatics, which is the study of the experienced body, very important in this course. And so part of my role is my fascination and my delight to emphasize embodied presence and to really bring that quality of embodiment, that compassion is not a head trip, right? This is something that we feel in our bodies and we can cultivate. So I'm really excited about that. And I think my interest in the years as it's gone by has been in, a lot of my training was in, basic Buddhism and Buddhist psychology. And I'm very interested in new languages and languages that are merging, that describe some of these traditional forms that we use, but that new language emerges. So every time we teach this course, I learn new language. So I thank you for all of that, which is always very, very exciting. And then I think maybe this is also about the body, and we say, well, we're on Zoom. But I have found in the last 2.5 years of teaching a lot on Zoom and doing a lot of work with movement and with the body, that it really is possible to create a community. I feel like we can feel each other. It's completely possible. And it's been exciting to feel that frontier and know that we'll have that available for us in the future. So yeah, it's just wonderful and exciting. I'm excited for the study that Jordan is, bringing to all of us, and look forward to getting to know all of you. And of course, you can always reach out to me as well. And now I would like to hand it over to our other colleague, Carla. Carla?
Thank you, Erica. Hi, everyone. I am so happy to be here and just share again in the excitement of all of us being together and being in community. And I was just feeling so much sparkling kind of energy just as the chat was immediately opened and you all took the call to start to get to know one another and just say your name to one another and where you are, like where you're at. And that just was so touching to me, and it helped me to feel like I am in the right place with the people who really want to be doing this work. And we're already forming community, as Erica was talking about, and doing this together. So I thank you for starting off that way and welcoming us in that kind of way. It was really beautiful. So again, my name is Carla Burns, and I have also been in the Naropa community for a little while now, I think for almost 12 years. And it's been a pleasure and a delight. And so much of the work that I do does focus on compassion and how we can use compassion as a way to really transform ourselves to be the people that we want to be and to really help in this world. I can't think of a time ever actually where compassion wouldn't be appropriate, where someone would say, no, not this time, not don't be compassionate this time. And so I think there's something very magical about that. As much as I can feel compassion to be just a natural part of who I am and something that can spontaneously arise and show up in moments, there's also something that can feel really mysterious about it, because we all have it. We all want it. We all know it when we feel it. And yet there's so many different ways to describe it. I think that's what we get to explore in this class, is all the many facets of compassion and how it's really endless and vast, and also so very deeply personal and touching to us. And so I am always intrigued by things like that feel like somewhat of our superpowers, things invisible and yet visible to us. And so this is something that I have a particular calling toward. I did my Master's of Divinity here at Naropa University, and the more you study each, of these wisdom traditions or wisdom religions or different spiritualities, modalities, I feel like they're all calling us back to our compassionate selves, to our hearts, that the compassion is the answer. Compassion is what's really going to save us all from ourselves. And so I find that to be intriguing, all the different ways, as Erica was talking about, that we can, use different cultures, different religions, different modalities and psychology, and all different fields of study that want to know more about what compassion is. So I think we all have a calling for it and toward it. And so I am excited that we're starting to answer that call and come together and really give more of our awareness, our time, and our attention to this powerful thing that can be so beneficial. So thank you all for being here. I'll turn it to you, Jordan.
Thank you both so much. Yeah, I'm going to actually pull up a graphic that we use as part of this program, and it helps us understand the title of this program of Welcome, which is actually an acronym. And I'm also going to just talk briefly about a few logistics details about how this course will go and how to be prepared to sort of follow along with it. So I think you all can see this screen now. So we call this program Welcome, again, as an acronym. And here you can see spelled out, and we'll share this with you. This is the intention behind this acronym. And we will take sort of each letter of the Welcome acronym week by week. So this week we're focusing on the welcome aspect of welcoming, which of course is a theme and sort of welcoming you all here. But we'll actually be doing a practice, or maybe we might call it an unpractice later, that Erica will guide us in, called a welcoming practice. And so it has a lot to do with that. Kindly greet each moment with mindfulness and gentleness. And you can see then where we're going. In future weeks, we're going to talk about embodiment and mindfulness next time around. Then we're going to begin a set of practices that will continue throughout this course that are really commonly used now in compassion training, called loving kindness meditation practices. And we'll focus on loving kindness for ourselves and loving kindness for others. And we'll sort of gradually expand our circle of care. And so that is a key component of how this course is structured, is that we sort of, and this is why we have these ripples here, compassion starts with personal benefits, but it quickly extends beyond ourselves. And of course, there's feedback loops in that. And that's one of the things that makes compassion such a powerful practice, is that it doesn't just stay local to ourselves, but there's actually these influences that extend beyond ourselves, maybe even expand our sense of self over time. And we experience the reciprocity. So there would be good reason to believe that we will actually experience the reciprocal benefits of extending compassion both to ourselves and others over time. And then we're focusing more, obviously, on compassion itself, opening our circle of care to others. How do we maintain this sense of compassion in the midst of daily life? And then finally, we'll focus on engaging the world from a place of compassion, not just our sort of everyday social interactions that we're building up to, but actually more on a societal level over time. And so the day following each class, you will receive an email, and that email will include your readings for that week. And so you're invited to participate and read some readings. And interestingly, in this course, the readings come after the week. So they flow from what we covered in that week. So this upcoming week's readings will extend our learning from what we're covering this week. You'll also receive what we call fieldwork assignments. So there will be a fieldwork assignment for each week, which is about beginning to integrate or bring these lessons and teachings into your daily life. And we will have meditation practices as well that we'll be teaching you in the class, and that we'll be asking you to practice at least 3 times a week throughout the duration of this course. And so that can be relatively brief, something like 20 to 30 minutes of at-home practice 3 times a week. But we'll talk more about the role of practice and the intention behind the practice later today. We're also going to be recording each class, so it's a good heads up for you to know about that. We're recording each week. But we do ask that you attend live, because there are, again, these interactions that we'll have with each other, these discussions, and that's a big key part of this course. If you do need to miss a week, we ask that you just miss 1 live week, and that you please try and make it for all the remaining live sessions. All right, last couple things. For students that are taking this for credit, there are going to be some additional requirements to get this for course credit. And that will include a weekly assignment of posting on the discussion board. So we'll send out an announcement about that. And finally, if you're taking this as part of the study or as part of the course, I have a way of keeping attendance. I'm going to share a link in the chat and ask you to briefly just put your name in there as a way of taking attendance each week. So please keep an eye out for that, and I'll send it out a couple times each session, so you can do that. All righty. I think now I'm passing it back to you, Carla. We're ping-ponging a bit here.
Thanks, Jordan. Okay, so we thought now we would get started in getting to know each other in community. So we're going to be gathering into breakout rooms. I think it's turning out to be, there'll be about 3 or 4 of you in a room together. And what you're going to do during your time together, it's just going to be about 10 to 15 minutes. Oh, 4 to 5 per room. Thanks, Jacob. Is you're going to talk a bit about your name. So this can be a great way for us to come together in community and to get to know one another, but also to really contemplate some aspects of ourselves that we don't normally think about. We often say our name over and over and over in the day, but how often are we really relating to where it comes from and what it means for us? So part of the instruction is to talk about your name, talk about where it came from, maybe talk about who gave you the name, how you relate to your name, and how others, your friends and your family members, also relate to your name. So this could be your birth chosen name, or it could be your birth name, or it could be a name that you choose for yourself. It could be a nickname, many different things. So given the time that we have, just make sure that you have enough time for each of you to speak, a few minutes about your name. Okay? All right. always fun to watch everybody rush back in from the room suddenly. It's like a fun game. Hi, everybody. Hopefully you got to know each other a little bit, those of you in your small groups. So we have a few minutes before we do a lovely activity with Erica. And maybe just take a moment right now, maybe even look away from the screen for a moment, just give your eyes and body a break and contemplate some of your intentions for being here tonight and for being in this program in general. And so at your own rate and pace, we're going to share in the chat some of our intentions, so just that we can get an idea, get a pulse of what's in the compassion field, so to speak. So please share in the chat anything that's coming up for you around your intention for being in the Welcome Compassion training.
Carla, we're supposed to type it?
Yes. Yeah,
Wow.
just go ahead and type
Don't
it.
type that fast.
If you need to abbreviate, go ahead.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, or maybe just pick one of the many reasons why you might be here. I'll read a few. So many good things to learn about myself, lots of learning and growth, to connect, to renew my faith in humanity, self-care and better caring for others, to be present, to be kinder, to be a light in the dark, to learn how to be more gentle with others when I am experiencing uncomfortable emotions. I feel like the world needs more of it, and so do I. To have an open heart, being kinder, to learn how to have compassion for someone who is dying, to learn to practice something new, to connect to myself and others, to expand my awareness and practice of holding space for myself as well as others, to increase my knowledge of bringing awareness to stillness, to give more primacy to mindfulness and compassion in my life, learn new practices and connect with like-minded beings, open my heart even more and do so in community, self-growth, and it goes on. And you can read these and scroll through this beautiful cascade of our intentions that will be here and be here during our break as well. If you want to come back or if you want to add to, or as things progress and you realize that more intentions are coming forth, please feel free to add to our communal intentions and kind of our agreements as well being here. I realize as I look over this, I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that that's why I am here too. I think that's beautiful, whatever, finding ways that you can also connect with one another through this activity. So thank you for being here and for sharing your compassionate, brilliant hearts. So Erica, I'm going to turn over to you now.
Yes, thank you for those thoughts and contemplations. So Jordan mentioned this practice, non-practice that we're going to do as a ground. And I'd like to credit Dr. Galen Ferguson, one of our wonderful professors at Naropa University for many years, for kind of naming this as a practice, non-practice. And we love to begin sessions with this because it's kind of, in a way, a real ground of where we're coming from. And that ground being that we need to, in some ways, be present to whatever is happening right now. right? So that's a ground for this whole development of compassion. And a part of that is welcoming how we actually feel, what we're experiencing. In some ways, you could say it's self-compassion, but how often do we really take the time to just stop and to really just notice or feel? What are we feeling? What's happening? What's going on? So we call it a non-practice because, as Jordan mentioned, we've heard a lot about mindfulness. My mind is full of the breath or full of a thought or full of something. So with this, it's just completely open. So we're actually welcoming everything. If you're a meditator, this could be a little hard because we're used to kind of corralling our mind to put our mindfulness on an object like the breath or something or a thought or an idea. So here, what we're going to do is I suggest for myself as well as I don't take a good posture. I just kind of slump a little bit and relax. Maybe take a few breaths. And our intention with this practice is to shine the light of your awareness on anything that you're experiencing right now in the moment. And the quality is of welcoming it. So this is non-judgmental. It's like, oh, I feel a little sad now, or oh look, oh there's my teddy bear in the corner. Oh, so whatever arises, what's different than spacing out is that you're aware of the present moment, but we're not corralling it. It just keeps shifting. What are you feeling? What are you seeing? What are you thinking? And we just let it run and we welcome it. We go, yes, this is life. This is me right now. And this is where we want to start. We want to start where we are in the present moment. So maybe a breath and then just let it go. And we're just going to let it rip. So, having touched ourselves, touched in to the present moment, how we are, let's extend this a little bit. So, it's still this quality of touching in, but we're going to put a little lens on it. So, if we could just take a little stretch and kind of move our bodies a little bit, and we're trying to bring up more bodily sensation, right? So when we move, right, our body touches itself, right? Tissues are moving against each other. And so we want to bring up body sensation. So yeah, you can do anything you like. You could even stand up, sit down, jiggle. I love jiggling, right? Or squeezing face, hands, whatever feels good. Just bring up body sensations so they're available for us. Good. Now I can just settle down again, right? And maybe here you want to take perhaps a little bit more of a kind of a posture. And then just let your awareness wander around to all of the different bodily sensations as you feel them. I call this aimless wandering through the body. So we are bringing it to bodily sensation, right? But we're not rejecting some, accepting others. We're not particularly lingering. We're just letting ourselves wander around. Right? You might feel tingling, you might feel heat, you might feel something hurts, you might feel your breath. Just let it wander, just feeling it. So your mind is full, that moment of that sensation. And again, it's welcome, welcome. It's all good. All of those sensations are, you're alive and you're feeling. You might feel your heart beat, little gurgles. Then just one other little switch here, which is to now bring your awareness to sound. What do you hear? Again, let it wander. Could be something and something else. Your mind wanders, gently bringing it back to sound. And maybe we'll end with just a couple deep breaths. Great. So I think all of our compassion practices do begin with this sense of non-judgment and ability to really touch in to how we're feeling with many levels, whether it's body or sound or taste or smell or all of our perceptions. And then compassion, right, can grow out of this or be a part of this touching in to one's experience in the present moment. So we're going to keep going. I'm going to now, let's see, maybe we can have, actually, Jordan, do we have time for a little discussion?
Yeah, I think that would be great, actually.
Okay, great. So this is just, I guess, raise your hand. Is that how we do it?
Yeah, if people are familiar with Zoom, there's a reactions button in the bottom that allows you to raise your hand if you have a question. I think our focus is on the experience of this non-practice practice, so to speak, which we realize is a bit unstructured, and that is part of the intention of this kind of experience. And so if you're experiencing, I'm not sure that I know the technique of this practice, that is actually part of what we're working with, settling into. But nonetheless, any kind of experiences that people want to share or questions about the experience? Deanna?
There we go. Sorry, I saw a little button that said unmute
Sure.
myself. When Erica had said, now pay attention to the sound, it was almost like everything became a lot louder, if that makes any sense. Yeah, so almost not even aware of how many sounds were occurring that are buffered out, and maybe the energy that's used to buffer out all of those different sounds. So it was neat, sudden awareness of everything becoming very loud, but then also a stillness and trying to track where the sounds were coming from.
Interesting. Yeah. Other thoughts, questions, experiences? It's all welcome.
I think Kyle and then Fred.
Yeah, Erica, one of the things I really appreciated you bringing in was a light note you put in about, but not bringing in a posture, like let it go into the slump, because it's just very fascinating. Because definitely when I'm used to, okay, spine's this way and think this way, and the shoulders, it's interesting because it totally shifts it away from. I mean, you of course you can be welcoming in that place of meditation, but it's really, it was kind of cool. It's like, oh, when I slump, this actually changes the attitude a little bit. And, it was really fun to play with that. So thank you. That was very helpful.
You're welcome. Thank you.
This adds a tool to our covert meditation practice toolkit. You can do this anywhere and no one will know that you're actually doing some kind of meditation practice.
I can now talk about the qualities of slumping.
Fred? Oh, you're muted, Fred. I think we'll unmute you.
How's that?
Good.
Can you hear me? I'm just going to add that when I listen, I hear traffic maybe off in the distance. I can't divorce the sound from a judgment. I don't like the sound. I don't like this. I like this. And I don't know whether I'm starting at a point 10 zillion light years away from you guys where you can just listen to the sounds and not make a judgment. But I don't think I can listen to any perception and not have an instinct reaction to it.
Yeah, so just to respond, that's a great point, and that is part of our experience, and that's what the meditation is. So you're noticing that, yeah. And that's the value of it. It's like, gee, like everything I experience, I'm kind of judging it, and then if we're going to extend to others, we have to extend to ourselves, some kind of kindness and generosity. And so, of course, part of that is noticing, oh, gee, I don't do that so much. So perfect. Yeah.
And with this practice too, if you have resistance to doing it, or you have that kind of resistance come up, the instruction is to welcome that. So you're also welcoming the judgment. So trying not to add another layer of judging yourself for having judgment in this practice.
I'm good at that. I'm good at that.
Lily?
Yeah, I really love, so I took the contemplative practice or contemplative, I can't remember what the class was called with Charlotte last semester, but we had to make our own contemplative practice by the end of the semester. And it was the first meditation practice that we did. That was my contemplative practice, was just allowing yourself to experience. And it really reminds me a lot of how Buddhist meditation, I can't remember the exact word for it, but it basically translates to calm abiding, where you practice with your eyes open to integrate mindfulness and like stillness into your day-to-day life, where it's not like your eyes are closed and you're shutting yourself off and then you have to re-enter into your life. So I just think it's really amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the practice is called shamatha. I just remembered. So yeah, thanks.
Couple others there.
Couple more comments, and then we'll go to break.
Yeah.
We're going to take our 10-minute break after this. Nathan?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of piggyback on what Fred, I believe, said before. It's not just sound that it's hard to disassociate the feeling from the sensation. If you are mindful and say you had a hard day, or somebody dear to you is hurting, or if you're unhappy with how your body looks or feels or the size thereof, so as you're scanning your body, you get to your stomach, for example, and you're like, well, I don't really like this part of my body. It's not just sound, it's every sensation that we have, and every feeling that we have has a connotation with it. And I find it very challenging, in a positive way. I mean, it's an opportunity to disassociate the feeling from the feeling of that feeling. Mm-hmm. So if you're sad about something, acknowledging sad is a good feeling to have. It's okay to have, but it's a painful feeling. Stopping before that but. So it kind of goes to that sound of the highway is annoying. Is the but, right? It's the sound of the highway, but it is annoying. It's like, it's not just sound, it's everything that's inside of our body has a connotation, and being able to master the dissociative qualities thereof is not easy.
Well said.
And it speaks too to the richness of this practice, just this basic noticing of what we're noticing. There's all these layers of our experience. If you have this practice in your back pocket, you really should never be bored in some sense. You could, sort of abolish the idea of waiting, sometimes it's said, because you have this available now. And I think we have one more person, but there's no name, it just says iPhone.
Is that me?
Yep.
Okay. All right. In my small group, they said my name was coming up. It's not coming up on here. All right.
No worries.
Yeah, I found the exercise a little confusing. I understood you to say it's a non-practice. So you're saying it's a practice, but now you're saying, we said it was non-practice. Now you're saying it's a practice. And I guess I've been really appreciating and enjoying stillness and peace, and doing exactly the opposite, not, just going all over the place. So I found it very chaotic for me. And yes, noticing the thoughts and associations with everything. For the sound, I really enjoy the quietness. It just had a very, very subtle fan sound and the little ringing in my ears, and that was about it. But I do have a question for you, and because when people talk about judgment, I always ask, are you differentiating between value judgments and moral judgments? Because we say like the traffic's annoying, as opposed to I prefer quiet to traffic, And so I wondered, are we using judgments specifically referring to moral judgments about conditions outside ourselves, or are we talking about our personal preferences?
That's a lot. Yeah. I think you're bringing up the annoying things about the non-practice, which is it's hard for us to just be with ourselves as we are. So of course, we say practice, non-practice. We're kind of, somewhat laughing there, but the non-practice part is that could you just be?
Yeah, I found that easier to do than to do what you asked us to do, which is try to pay attention to a lot of things at one time.
No, well, the first part really is just to just be and notice that. That's it. That's the welcoming, to just be, to notice that. Yeah. And then you notice if judgment comes up. And I don't know if I could speak to the moral or the other. Maybe Jordan, you could. I'm not sure.
I'll say something briefly about that. Yeah.
Okay.
It actually came up one time in a peer-reviewed paper that I wrote about mindfulness and judgment. Is that there's different kinds of judgments. So I think what you point to is really valuable, actually, for specificity's sake. And one distinction I like to make is between judgment that's more affective, more emotional judgment kind of evaluation, good, bad, neutral kind of, and that's what we're speaking to, versus discernment, right? So ideally, these practices actually help us cultivate greater discernment, especially with regard to things that might promote benefit versus harm and so on that have to do with morality. So yeah, we're not trying to get rid of those kinds of judgments, those kind of valuable discernments that help us see clearly. We're instead working with that emotional layer that's sort of labeling our experience good, bad, or neutral. Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to be going to a break.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we're a little past time.
Yeah.
Thank you, though, for that comment. And I'm sorry we didn't get to all the detail with it. Yeah. So we're going to take a 10-minute break, please. So we'll come back at 45. So whatever hour you're at, we'll come back, please, at 45.
And if you can on break, when you come back, bring back something to write with, pen and paper. We might be using that in our next activities. Enjoy your break.
Welcome back. Welcome back. I said 45, so you got another 30 seconds or so here if you need it. And we can even invite our new practice, unpractice, whatever we're calling it, into this moment right now. Noticing what we're noticing. Whether it's sensation in the body, a sort of rush to get back to the computer. However we are, whatever is in our awareness, seeing if we can bring a quality of welcoming to that. It's here right now. Can we accept that it's here? Can we welcome its presence? All right, so each class, you'll see, we didn't talk about this yet, but each class is a mixture of, we have a content element. Today, we're really focused on this idea of what is compassion, which we'll get to if we have a bit more time, but also this quality of welcoming and welcoming you all to the course. That's the content element. And then we have a practice element. And this week's practice is our welcoming unpractice. And the third thing we have is a science piece. So we try to bring in applied insights from compassion science or from adjacent fields that we think are useful for us in this training context, are personally relevant. So that's what we're going to go over right now. We're going to talk a little bit about the science of neuroplasticity. And perhaps you're familiar with that term. You know a bit about neuroplasticity already. That's great. We're not going to hopefully be too basic in this overview, but we're going to get into things that matter actually for increasing or enhancing our neuroplasticity throughout this training course. So what do we really mean by that? Well, we mean we're enhancing our depth of learning and sort of the speed and efficiency and sort of meaningfulness of our learning in this course. That's really a synonym for neuroplasticity, is just deep learning. So let's go ahead and take a look at some, I have a PowerPoint put together about this, and we'll take a look at some of the stuff I wanted to talk about neuroplasticity. So there's the word. If you've not heard the word before, what does neuroplasticity mean? It basically is about our brain changing in response to experience. So it's a pretty simple meaning. It basically means that our brains have this capacity to adapt, to change in response to our experience. And what an extraordinary thing that we have that capacity built into. It's a feature, a really core feature of our nervous system. And it's not just true as children or as adolescents, but in fact, even well into adulthood, throughout the lifespan, our brain retains this property of being able to respond, being able to change in response to experience. Now, some of the early research on this topic, just to point to the sort of lineage of understanding here about neuroplasticity in humans, was actually done on London taxi cab drivers, to give you an idea of the profundity and sort of scope of neuroplasticity. That these London taxi cab drivers were had their brains assessed before and after 6 months on the job. So these were new taxi cab drivers. And they found structural changes in areas of the hippocampus in their brain, which is an area of the brain that is focused on spatial navigation. So it makes sense, right, that these London taxi cab drivers, as they got better at navigating the streets of London, their brain actually changed to support them. There was a corresponding change in the structure and function of their brain, especially in this area of the hippocampus that supports spatial navigation. Now, okay, that's kind of cool. That's interesting that our brain can change in response to something like our job or external demands on us like that. But what's really interesting, and where this course is headed, has to do with what we call self-directed or self-guided neuroplasticity. And this is the idea that once we learn about neuroplasticity, once neuroplasticity becomes a concept to us that we understand, and we understand this feature of our brains to change in response to experience, we can actually get a bit more in the driver's seat of our own taxi, can't we? And we can try and change our brain in ways that are in line with our values. So we can participate in some sense in this neuroplasticity. And if we learn more about neuroplasticity, the mechanisms that underlie neuroplasticity, that gives us even more power to do so. And so that's what we're going to be focused on this evening. How do we sort of enhance our learning in the context of this course? And the broader question is, why do we train in compassion? Why don't we just read a book about compassion and sort of intellectually understand compassion more? Why do we need to practice compassion? Why do we need to take it out in the midst of our lives and actually enact compassion? A lot of that has to do with the potential for deeper learning, more meaningful learning through neuroplasticity. So there is a myth that we need to get out of the way then to have this discussion, which is a myth that every experience we have changes the brain equally. You might hear this sometimes. People go to workshops or you hear a talk or something and people say, your brain's going to be different after this than it was before. And maybe in a really rudimentary sense, that's true. I mean, we are changing every single moment, right? But what we're really talking about is a more lasting impression kind of learning when we're talking about neuroplasticity. So what are the kinds of experiences? What are the elements or qualities of experience that are much more likely to leave that kind of imprint, that kind of neural lasting imprint in our minds and brains and hearts? And so I think of the analogy like footprints in the sand. The myth is that every step that we take is leaving a footprint in the sand and that it's changing our brain equally. But in fact, there are certain things that we can do and certain things that naturally occur that greatly enhance neuroplasticity. So the first of these is awareness, okay? And there's a particular kind of awareness here. It's awareness of the desire to change ourselves, okay? Awareness of what we want to change. So this is quite literal in our brains. It's not just something that we have this thought and then we sort of follow through with that thought because it's an intention we have or something. In the brain, when we make this kind of intention to change ourselves, when we set an intention like that, that we're interested in growing or evolving or improving ourselves, that is actually correspondent with the release of a neuromodulator called acetylcholine. Okay, so what's a neuromodulator? A neuromodulator is like a neurotransmitter like serotonin or dopamine. Acetylcholine could be called a neurotransmitter as well, depending on what it's doing. But a neuromodulator has a bit broader impact. It's sort of modulating processes across the board. And so acetylcholine is a molecule, a neurotransmitter that when we decide that we want to change something, some kind of process or aspect of ourselves, acetylcholine is released from certain areas in the brain that manufacture acetylcholine. And it goes in and actually tags the neurons that are in that area of the brain that are involved in that process that we're wanting to change. It's sort of like it puts a little stamp on them, a little tag on them. And it says, okay, these are the neurons that we might need to go in, the rest of the system might need to go in and make some changes in later on, okay? Now, whether that change actually occurs or not depends upon additional factors. But that first factor is key, awareness of what we're wanting to change. So that's why in a course like this, we ask you about your intention. We had you all put in the chats, what's your intention for being here? What is it that you'd like to grow more aware of or cultivate? That kind of contemplation can be very helpful in our journey with neuroplasticity. And it involves this neuromodulator of acetylcholine. Beyond that awareness, in adulthood, at least, neuroplasticity requires attention. So this attention can happen in a few different ways. It can happen in a relatively choiceless way. So if we're in a situation that really demands our attention really strongly, that can imprint an experience very strongly for us. We can have kind of a profound neuroplasticity as the result of having to pay attention because of the situational demands on us, like an emergency or something like that, right? I think back to the beginning of COVID, there was just this sense of vigilance about what we were doing. And it's likely that that actually involved more neuroplasticity. But the kind of self-directed neuroplasticity that we're aiming for involves a more effortful, conscious kind of attention. Unfortunately, in adulthood, in order to get neuroplasticity, we need to kind of put in some effort. So think of the difference between learning a language as a kid versus learning a language as an adult. When we're learning as an adult, we kind of have to grind at it, don't we? We have to really put in some effortful attention. But the good news is that feeling of effort that you have pays off. The research shows that that increases the likelihood that those neurons get tagged with that acetylcholine that we were just talking about. So there's sort of a greater density or likelihood then that those neurons will be marked as being subject to change later. And we'll get into when that change actually occurs. So an important sort of tip about this is to pay attention to when you're most attentive and alert throughout the day. We all have some optimal windows in the day. This is just a generalization here. Some of us, maybe we're more night owls. Some of us are early risers. Our attention is the best sometime in the morning. But to pay attention, when is our attention most optimal? And to actually try and prioritize those things that we're wanting to change about ourselves or wanting to improve about ourselves during those times. So to use our peak mind, to use our peak attention to our advantage, that's when neuroplasticity is most likely to occur. But some people sort of, they don't use that time wisely. They end up scrolling social media or, watching their favorite TV show or something like that when their attention is optimal. So figuring out where your attention is optimal and maybe choosing to do your compassion practices during that time or the readings during that time or other things that you care about. Of course, there's also the role of mindfulness itself. So this is a kind of neat figure that shows the different stages, the different networks that are involved in mindfulness meditation. We don't have time today, unfortunately, to go through all of these. But the basic idea is that as we train our attention, as we get better at noticing, just like we did during the welcoming practice, and we'll continue on that theme next week, that is also strengthening our capacity for neuroplasticity because it's strengthening our attention. Right, the third factor is repetition. So I brought in the idea of doing your practices for this course 3 times a week. That would be ideal. Why are we asking you to do the practices multiple times? Why isn't just one session enough? Well, is a one-off meditation session actually helpful? Does it actually promote neuroplasticity? I think a little bit. I think it can be helpful a little bit. If all you ever did was just one meditation session, or you just did the sessions that we did here in class, I think there would be a little benefit of that. But you probably heard this adage before: neurons that fire together, wire together. Right? Neurons that fire together, wire together. And that is about neuroplasticity. But really, what we should say is neurons that repeatedly fire together, wire together. Okay, it's not enough just for that one time. That's like the footprint in the sand. It doesn't leave a lasting impression. So when we practice our practices repeatedly, there's a few things going on there. One is that we're getting more familiar with the practice and it will become less effortful over time to us. You'll see as we start to learn the practices for this course, like loving kindness meditation, that maybe the first few times that you practice them, it involves some effort. It's kind of doesn't totally feel natural to you. But as you develop the capacity and as you practice with them more and more, it becomes less and less effortful. And that's because of this neuroplasticity occurring. Neurons that repeatedly fire together, wire together. And it's not just that. We also have this corresponding phrase: neurons that repeatedly fire apart, wire apart. Okay? So neuroplasticity isn't just about the emergence of new connections. It's also about letting go or unlearning old patterns and habits that kind of keep us stuck in a loop of behavior or thoughts, or maybe it's a loop of self-aggression for some of us, many of us perhaps. So as we practice something like self-compassion and self-kindness, there's going to be this interesting thing that happens. Sometimes in compassion training, we call it backdraft, which is that as we develop more compassion, as we get more familiar with self-compassion or compassion for others, occasionally we will experience this kind of backdraft of noticing the opposite tendency arise. Noticing as we're sitting with ourselves or a practice, resistance arise, or that judgment that Fred was speaking about earlier arising as we're practicing non-judgment. Why does that happen? Well, part of it is that those old neurons, that old pattern of our neurons firing is getting sort of exhausted. That neurons are firing apart and they're wiring apart, okay, in that process. So we can actually feel, I believe, from the inside, this neuroplasticity happening as we train in this stuff. All right, the fourth factor is a sense of motivation. We could say intention, but really we know from research that in order to get the best neuroplasticity, the sort of strongest neuroplasticity in adulthood, we need a sense of urgency. Okay, so how do we create that sense of urgency? Well, it might be a little far-fetched to create that for ourselves kind of artificially, but I'll just point to something in traditional compassion training practices. They talk about meditating as though your hair is on fire. Okay, doesn't work for me, as you can see, but this kind of idea is to create this sense of there's not enough time. You know, we're running out of time. There's a sense of urgency for our practice to actually fully come into our full potential as human beings so that we can live out our sense of purpose and maximize our benefits to those that we love and perhaps even to those that we've never met. So really, how do we connect with this sense of urgency, meditating as though our hair is on fire, especially if we don't have hair? Really what we're connecting with is our why. Why are we doing this? Going back to what Carla guided us in earlier and that you put in the chat, your intention for being here. So when you sit down to practice, why am I choosing to do this practice? A lot of it at the beginning, admittedly, may come down to some sense of trust in us. We're telling you this practice is good for increasing compassion, increasing mindfulness. But slowly over time, as you get more experience, the evidence will emerge in your own lived experience around this stuff. A feedback loop will occur. And you will find yourself more present in a social interaction with a loved one or a friend or a stranger. You'll find yourself with less self-aggression than you might typically have. So these practices are subtle in some ways, and yet their influence is quite profound. And we're going to return to that in a little bit, that the neuroplasticity that comes from training and compassion is a unique kind. So we'll talk about why. But maybe even journaling about this at some point, if you're called to. Why are you doing this? How does it connect with your broader purpose and goals? All right, and the last factor that I'd like to talk about is getting enough sleep and rest. So earlier, remember, I talked about acetylcholine going in and marking neurons for change, and then attention sort of increasing the density, that effortful attention increasing the density of acetylcholine or the amount of acetylcholine that's going in and actually marking those neurons for change. When does the change actually occur? Well, research suggests that the actual structural or physical changes to the neurons themselves doesn't happen until sleep. So we can mark those neurons, but if we don't get enough deep rest, if we don't get enough sleep, they're not going to be able to change themselves. The brain's not going to be able to update itself as well. Now, some of my students in other contexts kind of groan at this because they're like, I don't sleep well. There's an alternative, which is what's called non-sleep deep rest. Maybe you've heard of something like yoga nidra before, but it doesn't have to be that. There are other kinds of protocols out there. And so if you need advice around that, I'd be happy to share. You can send me an email. But those are called non-sleep deep rest protocols. And it appears that those are also useful for promoting neuroplasticity if we can't sleep. Okay, now here's what's unique about the kind of neuroplasticity we're aiming for in a course like this. Remember earlier when I was talking about London taxi cab drivers, and I said that they had changes in an area of their brain called the hippocampus that is involved in spatial navigation. Well, it turned out that that capacity that they grew for spatial navigation didn't really help those taxi cab drivers in other, even very similar areas of their life. So when researchers gave them tests and things to test their spatial memory and so on, they were better at navigating the streets of London, but they didn't necessarily get better at those other kinds of tasks. And so that's what we call a sort of task-specific neuroplasticity. It means that they learned something and it helped them with that one thing. But what we're doing in a course like this is we're focused instead on the training of what we sort of call core processes of the mind, core cognitive processes. And that kind of learning, that kind of neuroplasticity generalizes across many different facets of our life. So you get sort of more bang for your buck for this kind of learning, you could say, in the sense that when you learn compassion, compassion, as Carla was saying earlier, is relevant to almost everything that we do on a daily basis, whether it's how we're treating ourselves, or whether it's how we're caring for others, or whether it's that simple interaction that we have in the grocery store with the clerk that maybe makes their day and maybe even makes our day a little better too. So by targeting these core processes of the mind, we have the potential to learn something, to change our brain consistent with our values in ways that have a really wide and broad impact. And that's the difference of a kind of training like this. That also happens to be what's different about a mindfulness training as well. And it's part of the power of contemplative learning or contemplative practice more broadly. So I'm going to stop here and just ask briefly if there's any questions, and then we're going to maybe have time for one more thing as a group here today. So I do see a couple questions that are about sharing. We are going to have the recordings, and I'm not sure about sharing the PowerPoints per se, but we can find something to work around with that, Christina. So feel free to send me an email and we'll work that out. Any questions about neuroplasticity or? Yeah, Christina?
So I just have one, because I'm kind of fascinated by this whole idea. Like, we understand that, like, when we're younger, we usually like retain things better, and then like as our brains slowly like develop, and then there's kind of a point in time where they don't stop developing, right?
Yeah.
But it slows down profusely.
Yeah.
Have they done any studies on like the neuroplasticity in children versus like in adults? And then also, I'm fascinated by this mention that you had of the situational demand of attention, where it's like maybe even as an adult, if I have to have this like really strong demand of attention, it's going to affect me more than if I'm just, you know, squirrel over everything else. Have they looked at children versus adults doing that, or just children as adults to see the differences? I'm just curious.
Yeah, thanks for this question. I think it's really fascinating too. The first question I can answer that has to do with children versus adults. So the mechanisms that underlie neuroplasticity shift from childhood to adolescence to a developed, sort of fully developed brain. And as you point out, that's not like a single point in time, but the average age that occurs around is 25, right? So around the age of 25, these mechanisms of plasticity shift from something that is more of a passive process of learning, right? Which is why children can learn a language, just kind of absorb it through osmosis. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, and we don't have to get into all the mechanisms, but children have actually a higher density of neuronal connections. And so when neuroplasticity is occurring, it's occurring through a paring down of connections rather than an increasing of the density or how strong they are. Whereas in adulthood, we've pared down the connections and we have a sort of developed brain. And then in order for neuroplasticity to occur, we need to fire together, wire together. So it's a more effortful kind of process. The second question, I'll just speak to, yeah, the urgency kind of thing, or like, unfortunately, traumatic events also are likely to increase neuroplasticity. And I would imagine that that kind of, situational demand or, crisis or something is also likely to affect neuroplasticity in children, but I'm not familiar with that literature. Yeah. Thank you. All right, any other questions? All right, so thanks all for David, yeah.
Sorry. I was wondering, as far as the repetition, if 3 times is good, is 7 times even better?
Yeah, right.
Not that I'm an overachiever, but I'm just
Yeah, I would imagine, 7 times, generally speaking, is better. Although we do say, in these kinds of practices, not to just dive into the deep end and do the sort of hardest thing, heavy lifting first. And you'll see how we gradually build, through the course of this training with the sort of level of difficulty, you could say, that we're working with in our compassion practice. And so I would just advise to just be careful if you decide to do more practice, that you're not doing so in a way that is subtly self-aggressive. Okay, I know that you won't probably do so in a really self-aggressive way, but just not to sort of, try and sit for hours or something like that. And I don't think that's what you're asking about. But yeah, Carlo or Erica, do you want to say anything about 7 times versus 3 times in your experience?
I think you covered it, Jordan.
Okay.
I think it's all about our attitude that we're taking towards
Yeah.
ourselves when we're doing these things.
Yeah, I like to take a day off, so I'll just add that too, meditation, Sabbath, or something like that. All right, we got one more question here.
The thing about the number of times, when he asked that question, I thought to myself, I would think it was probably most, out of all those things, what's most important is motivation or urgency. I know Tony Robbins talks about having a big enough why, what's moving us to do it. And I was thinking about your questions about what motivated me to kind of study compassion.
Yeah.
Get into a long story, but it was a profound traumatic experience where I came to the conclusion that I was going to have to see things differently. And ultimately, it was about states of unconditional love. And that I realized the importance of that. And that was very highly motivating. So it wasn't so much a matter of repetition, but, urgency, importance, motivation, and then just practicing all the time, to really valuing.
Yeah, beautiful. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think that why question, is really critical and maybe central. And to the extent that we can build that into this training, we will kind of circle back around to it again and again, because it's not like we just ask that question once to ourselves and then it's set, right? It's actually about mindfulness or awareness of our why and coming back to that, and how even our why evolves and changes over time. A lot of times it changes, from something that's just a personal thing, like I want to reduce my own suffering, to something that's more social, like I want to improve the well-being of my family or friends, to even something potentially wider than that. So thank you for speaking to that. We've got another hand raised, and I think maybe we will take this last one because this is a good discussion, but I want to make sure we have time for one other piece today. Jennifer?
Well, and as you're talking and the hands up and going up, I also think about the role of time to rest and integrate. So doing 3 versus 7 or any of that, the allowing the space in between to process and integrate, whether consciously or even subconsciously.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, and that's what I was speaking to with that 5th factor around sleep, quality of sleep. So yeah, definitely if we're like pushing and we're practicing in a way that's maybe interfering with our sense of rest, that could actually interfere with our neuroplasticity over time when we're learning something new. So we need to sort of titrate or move between periods of focus and effort and attention, and then, periods when we rest and kind of are more in that maybe yin time. And that includes quality of sleep as well. But yeah, I think each person, the frequency is going to be a little bit different. That's why we say just kind of a minimum of 3 sessions as kind of a floor for us as a group. I think that's a helpful number or guide. But of course, each of us are going to land in different places around that. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Carla, let me pass it to you. And I know that we're running low on time here.
Yeah, it's fine. We can modify. Thank you, Jordan. So I think in some ways this segues nicely into the topics that have been brought up of, what's our motivation? Why would we cultivate compassion? And also, what is it? And what isn't it? What is not compassion? So we wanted to give all of you some time to really think about that, a little bit of time with what we have to really contemplate that. So if you have your journals or a way to kind of jot down some notes, again, this might be time again when we're talking about rest to maybe rest from the screen. We were so all focused on your beautiful PowerPoint slides. So maybe let's give our eyes and body some rest for the screen as we just think about, why would we cultivate compassion? What is it? And what is not compassion? And maybe again, coming back to this place of the body that Eric has been leading us to in these felt senses of also, what is your body saying? How do you feel when you engage with each one of these questions? What do you notice in your felt field, in your senses? And where do you notice these places in your body that might also carry the answers to these questions? So we'll give us a few minutes to just think and contemplate and feel into some of these questions around compassion. So in just a few moments, we're going to go out into breakout rooms. And I think just groups of 3 would be good, just for each having maybe 2 minutes to speak. We'll just be away for 6 minutes total, to just share what came up for you around this. How would you describe what compassion is? How would you describe when you're not experiencing compassion? And what are your motivations, or why would we cultivate compassion? So let's have a conversation about that together in breakout rooms. Jacob, are we ready? Cool.
All right. Welcome one last time this evening, and we're going to close here in a moment. Let me just speak about how what you were just doing is related to our field work for this upcoming week. Remember that our field work is about sort of carrying these teachings or the content of the week into our daily life. And in this case, it's a little bit more passive in the sense that we're asking you to pay attention as you go throughout your daily life and to notice moments that you actually see compassion in the world, whether it's compassion from one person flowing to another. It could be yourself enacting compassion toward yourself, or it could be you enacting compassion toward another, or it could be you receiving compassion from others. But this extends our contemplation of what compassion is. We're not going to spoil it just yet with the exact view that we have. We're going to leave it a little bit more open for right now. What is compassion? And in fact, I think it's good to keep it open ongoingly as an inquiry. But we think of this as a snapshot of compassion. So next time we're going to maybe ask you about this is do you want, or is there a kind of snapshot that you have from your week that really exemplifies compassion for you? You know, you may not have an exact way of languaging of compassion is ... but this snapshot really exemplifies it. You know for sure that compassion was present in that particular moment. And so if you can come equipped next time with that, that would be helpful. But you're going to receive an email next, probably tomorrow, with a couple of things, a few things. One is the recording of this evening. A second is a reminder about our meditation practice for this week. You're also going to have some readings, and there'll be instructions about this field work in there. So if you missed what I just said, or you're a little confused about it, you'll see it in writing in the coming days. All right. So that is it for our first evening together. Again, I thank you so much for being here, for your intention for being here, for your interest in growing more compassionate. I really mean that sincerely. I think it's truly extraordinary that we're all here gathered together with that intention. And I'm excited to see what we make of it in the future. So thank you all, and I wish you a great rest of your night.